This is Kirsten Gunnerud with the PlayCreate podcast, introducing part 3 of our epic conversation with Robert Poynton, author of Do Improvise and Do Pause, and creator of Rocket-Trike's Launchpad. In part 1, we explored that launchpad, and in part 2, the importance of pausing and play to creating breakthroughs and working with whatever shows up and creating forward. And now in part 3, the conversation continues. Yes, this was an epic conversation. Here we dive much deeper into the pause and why it is so incredibly powerful, how this tool can make such a big difference. We talk about it, including how Jill and I look at it as being the center of the launch pad, that place between letting go, noticing more, and using everything, that place where you can almost shift time and pause in the moment to find the opportunity that's right there so that you can work with it.
You know, I love in the idea of the improv, but as you're going into the pause, what are you noticing when you're talking to people? I mean, we see it all the time for us about just trying to slow everything down just for a moment, because we'll just, what I keep going back to is when you were talking about senses. So when you're talking about do improv, you're always talking about, okay, we're using more senses. We're not just coming into a situation and being like, oh, well, that's just what's there. We're like, okay, how am I seeing this? How am I feeling it? Where do I feel it in my body? What am I hearing? What am I noticing? All of this. And the pause, I feel like for me, is a really big integral part of that, because it makes me just take in for a second. So we talk about intention a lot. Mm-hmm. So with the work that I do with trauma, I'm always talking about, we're here for a moment. What's the intention? And then let's go from there. So that everyone just has to pause in that moment and just notice what's coming up for them right there. Because I could have my own intention, but it's totally different than what yours is or what Kirsten's is. Like we're trying to do that all the time. So what are you noticing in your work with that?
Yeah, a lot of things. I suppose for me, one of the big learnings from working on the book and doing the research that led to it is this kind of really palpable sense in which time has just so many more dimensions than we normally give it.
Yeah.
We have this sort of idea as this thin line, and all you can do is chop it into bits. And it's interesting, this pattern has been in my thinking for a long time, because many, many years ago, I wrote a blog post called The Dictatorship of Diaries, calendars, you would call them. And the idea that a tool that we use to organize time is really nothing more than a line chopped into bits. And it doesn't matter if it's on a computer or on a piece of paper. And I remember thinking about it the first time when I was writing a book, because, you know, finish book or write book isn't something you can put in a calendar. Because it doesn't work like that. Right? It's bigger than that, and it's more difficult. But and nor can you break it down into simple bits. Maybe some writers can. Some people write in order. Some people write pieces. But for most writers that I know and most writers I read about, it's a much messier, looping back kind of a thing. So where do you put that on a line?
Yeah.
And so the challenge in that particular blog post was kind of to the tool designers of the world to say, especially with technology these days, give me something more helpful. Give me a thing that I can put somewhere that like starts to get annoyed or buzz or go red after a certain amount of time, but which doesn't kind of have these sort of fixed lines around it. So I think that what was the first clue for me that there's more to time than just this kind of chunks of time, and that not all units of time are the same. And of course, as soon as you stop to think about that, we all know that. We all know that 15 minutes waiting for a bus, or 15 minutes eating a brownie, or 15 minutes, a screaming kid are all different, So we know that. And I think so I suppose what I'm finding and what I'm trying to encourage people to do is kind of what you're already doing, which is to say, look, it might be just a moment, but it's not just a moment. There's a whole world in there. Or it might be just a weekend, or it might be just an hour. And I think what's interesting is that the getting to the edge of it, you have to get to that brink. and you have to kind of want to get your feet muddy.
Yeah.
To get in there, because there's this thing, and I'm pointing up here because it's, where we tend to think of our rational, cognitive, intellectual function. What Ian McGilchrist in his book, The Master in His Emissary, calls the Berlusconi of the brain, which is a bit of a European joke, but, Berlusconi is the Italian media-owning president, and so McGilchrist calls the kind of rational verbal function the Berlusconi of the brain because it owns all the media. Yeah. And so in your own mind, the bit that can reason and think and use words tells you that, lo and behold, the most important thing is reasoning and using words. You go, well, you would say that, and so heart and body and all those other things get left out. And so that's the part of us that says, keep on going, keep on ticking, got to achieve, got to tick, and I've just realized actually ticking things off and the tick off the same word, right? And so I suppose in my work, what I'm finding is I suppose I'm really trying to disabuse people of the notion that they don't have time to do this, by saying, well, it doesn't take much time, clock time, and then the kind of next one is that they sort of say was, well, I couldn't possibly go slowly. And you kind of go, well, yeah, but that's all relative. So what's slow and what's fast? And actually, in English, we have a lot of old wisdom to hand in the saying. So more haste, less speed. So even if you want to do things fast, don't be hasty, don't rush, don't hurry. And that was the fulcrum between the two books and the two bodies of work, really, was that realizing that skilled improvisers on stage do not hurry. Mm-hmm. They pause. Yeah. So they make something in real time, which is ingenious and inventive and satisfying for them and their colleagues as well as for the audience. And they do it fast, faster than anybody really, and yet they don't hurry. So I was like, ooh, what's going on there? So the kind of slow thing is not helpful. I'm a big fan of the slow movement in certain contexts, slow food, those sorts of things. But it only works if you frame it relative to something else, because sometimes slow isn't good. And sometimes pausing doesn't slow you down. It speeds you up. And they say that high performance sports stars, so tennis players, baseball players, actually what the very, very best players do is pause. They play the ball later, not sooner, later. They give themselves that bit more time, and they have the capacity to respond in less time. So there's the kind of slow misunderstanding, if you like. And then the third thing is kind of like, oh, well, I can't be seen to be doing nothing, or I couldn't do nothing. And of course, when you pause, you don't do nothing. There's a whole, as you rightly said, in that pause, you can check in with yourself, you can share with somebody else, you can notice how you're feeling. So you might have your intention, and you might have reasoned your way to that intention. And then when you hold it for that second, you might go, that doesn't feel right, actually. That's not what I'm intending anymore. Or you might suddenly notice a feeling about, I'm really, really curious, what his intention is.
Yeah.
So let me ask him. So that kind of, it's not nothing. But same thing the other way around. If we need to change things, and imagine pretty much everybody would agree that we need to change things, even those people who politically would completely disagree with me. They'd probably want to change different things than me. But I think we all want to change things. Nobody would pretend the world is perfect. How can we do that if we just keep doing what we've always been doing? And if we're head down and going like that? And if you don't stop for long enough to look up and out, to garner that extra piece of information or insight, or to ask somebody who has been there, or whatever it is, then how on earth are we ever going to change anything? Then we're just locked into a kind of inertia.
As you've been exploring pause more, even since writing the book, with all the conversations and things that you're having. So there are places where I have, like walking through a door, I always make sure to take a breath. And that's kind of my way of pausing and cleaning out before I enter whatever that next thing is. Or I have these little cues. But then there's the times when we're in the middle of something, we don't even realize it. And I always laugh about when you were writing and you and I were talking, and you were like, I can't write today. I have to keep going. And I'm like, but I have writer's block. And it was, Rob, just pause, pause. And
we're obtuse. We're obtuse beings. We're our own worst enemies in many ways. And I remember that incident very well. And I think it's a good example, actually, because first of all, it says, look, we're not, the reason it's worth dwelling on these things is because we're all prey to it. Nobody's immune, and me least of all. In fact, you know, they say that you write the books that you want to read, and so, you know, essentially that book's, I'm probably talking to myself, you know. But you helped me enormously that day. But I think what's interesting, if we go into it a bit more, is intellectually and rationally, as you said it to me, I was like, yeah, I know she's right. But emotionally, I couldn't get there because I'd been locked onto a particular thing that I had convinced myself I needed to do.
Right.
And it took me probably, once we finished speaking, it took me probably an hour to really hear you and to really sink into it. And then, of course, when I did, of course, it wove its magic, and it was the next day, and everything was fine, you know. So sometimes you're not going to want to, and sometimes it takes a friend, and sometimes, you know, who knows if in that instance what might have been getting in the way was, you know, my self-image. No, I know about this. Kirsten can't possibly tell me anything about this, you know. So I needed to kind of, and yes, I know, you know, obviously she looks like I need to pause, but I know that I don't need to, or, you know. So there can be lots of reasons that kind of get in the way.
We all do it. Like I do it every day, and what I'm trying to still figure out is, even with putting cues in place, and I've got my phone where I have 2 alarms a day to just, that's my pause moment. Like, I have all that, but we still, is there anything, or maybe sometimes it's that other person who reminds us, or our kids or sometimes maybe we're just supposed to be in that place. Or is there something,
well, I kind of go back to that compass idea. So orienting your compass. So there's not a direct route all the time, but there's that inner compass. So how do we reorient? So maybe it is in that moment, and being able to be perceptive enough to be like, well, okay, yeah, I don't have writer's block. I got this. And then all of a sudden the inner compass is like, oh wait, that just brought me back. So what things do we have that bring us back to
well, gosh, yeah, God, this is fascinating. So there's a couple of things I want to kind of just log here before. So the phone alarm thing, I've been thinking about that a lot in the last couple of days, and I've got a thought on that, but I want to go to what Jill said. So remind me to come back to that. I think that yeah, I think that there's remind me what you just said. There was something that's gone.
The compass, instead of just having like the due north. So we're always, I think what happens is people want answers, and they want it to be just so. And I just do A, B, C, and it's going to make sense. And just knowing like, we're always changing. I mean, you just talked about it. We're evolving culture. We're evolving species. So there aren't fixated points. However, there are things within us that help reorient us to a direction that's more aligned, or more in awareness, or more in the pause, or in the richness.
Yeah. I think I can kind of tie these two things together, because I'll start with the phone thing. So I was talking with somebody on the leadership program here in Oxford this week, and it came up, and she was talking about how she sets her phone and it just says breathe, and it was once an hour or something, and I was kind of like, wow, that's kind of cool. And then I thought, how do I feel about that? Because something instinctively didn't feel quite right. I still think that's a good thing, actually. I think that's helpful that technology can do that. But I was trying to explore, why didn't that feel quite right to me? And I realized that if you think about it, the device is still running on mechanical time. So it's saying, excuse me, time to pause. And it's time according to some external schedule. And I think it's back to the noticing. And so my reflections this week on this have been that maybe a huge amount of the value of the pause is in you noticing that it's time to pause.
Yes.
So if you delegate that noticing to someone else or something else, that's gone. And so it's about kind of bringing your noticing inside of you again, and feeling and making that choice and exercising some kind of almost sovereignty over yourself. And I think that Oh, it's come back to me now. Yeah, Rachel Liebus, the fabulous Rachel Liebus. So she's a psychotherapist here in Oxford, and she helps us on the program teaching meditation. And she has this beautiful way of explaining meditation. And so people have this idea that meditation is about stilling the mind. And for me, I can only speak from this one experience of this particular mind, but that is not it's not just difficult, it's impossible and pointless. That's not the way my mind works, and I'm pretty sure it's not the way anybody's mind works. And I just don't buy the idea of complete inner stillness. And so Rachel's way of teaching is great for me, because she says the nature of the mind is it drifts, it goes, it wanders. But there is an awareness that's beyond that thinking that can notice the wandering. And so you notice the mind has wandered and you choose to bring it back. And she has this lovely gesture where she says that the mind goes away and you choose to bring it back. She says the meditation is the bringing it back. Yeah. That's the meditation. And so what's really lovely about that is, if she's right, and it doesn't, right or wrong, it's a kind of, if that idea is helpful to you, then what that means is you can't meditate unless your mind wanders. Because if it never wanders anywhere, then you can't, and the meditation consists in the bringing it back, then you need to have gone in order to come back. So to the point about how do you cultivate this pause, I'd look at it this way. I was at a thing here in Oxford a few weeks ago with David Whyte, the poet, about his book Consolations, where he takes these words that are kind of tired and worn out and gives them new life. And he was talking about I think one of them is failure or something like that, and he's sort of repositioned failure as a kind of as a way to kind of acknowledge your imperfection, be compassionate to yourself, and embark upon a new new journey of learning. So we'll keep messing up, we'll keep forgetting. I'll need a friend to remind me. You'll need your watch can help occasionally, a child, a passerby, someone else, all sorts of things, and we'll keep failing. But since the business of life is confronting and engaging and overcoming those struggles and difficulties, that's what life is. That's not what happens in life, that's what life is. Yes. You see that any biological organism is struggling against, entropy, if you want to get all scientific about it, but it's struggling against something. And I don't just mean prey and predators. I mean, it's struggling against the fact that the universe is kind of wanting to run down and just even out. Yeah. And so, life is kind of going against the grain. It's going against the current. And energy and matter are cycling through us, but the pattern is the life, not the energy or the matter. So all our bodies are different. The matter in it, the precise atoms, are different now than they were 7 years ago. Even our bones, So we're this pattern, this kind of like a wave in the sea, and so kind of we're constantly in that process of struggling against, and so if there's no struggle, then where are we, and that's not just delight in suffering or be masochistic. It's just to say that's the way life is. But as a side note on that, you kind of go, no wonder all the great traditions have some word for suffering or karma, and it's because they're acknowledging and recognizing that this is the nature of being,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other thing that's coming to mind listening and just thinking through this is being in the process, which is again what the launch pad does for me, is helps me be in the process. Absolutely. But when we're in the process instead of the outcome, you had a deadline or something, right? I think at the time, or there was something you had to get to, which was part of where that pressure was coming from. And I think we get so focused again on this outcome or this finished product or this thing we have to get to, that we
I think I was,
being in the process.
We normally say in defense of myself, and I'm going to say, in attack of myself, if you can say that, is I don't think there was a deadline, but I would say that the deadline, the only one Miranda ever gave me, was the delivery date for the whole manuscript. And I would call that, in a way, of course it's a deadline. And I can't resist another Douglas Adams quote. He was famous for missing his deadline, so famous that his agent used to lock him in a hotel room and take away the key and only let him out for short walks so he would write. But he said, I love deadlines. I love the sound they make as they whoosh by.
Oh, I love that.
So no, I would think of that end point as a kind of what I would call a boundary condition. And I wasn't that, I was sort of close to it, but I wasn't that. The deadline in question was something I had promised to myself
Okay.
that I would deliver upon. Which is funny, actually, because David White was talking about that as well. And he said, there's this brilliant conceit, this brilliant idea he had about we have to learn how to break promises, particularly the invisible promises we make to ourselves about who we are.
Yes, I agree.
Amazing idea.
So good.
Nobody's ever, in our culture, it's, oh, you mustn't break a promise and blah, blah, blah. And you kind of go, no, and he's like, no, you must. You must.
And you are all the time.
And he said, and also because the real, true, big promises you can't break.
Yeah.
Even if you try. Yeah. And so that's how you know if it's a real promise. So this was one of those small promises I'd made to myself. And so I was irritated with myself and unable to hear you properly, but you insisted so that I kind of could. And that takes us to compassion for self. You know, we'll kind of keep messing up and we'll never get there.
Every day. That's one of the things we talk about on the podcast is we are not experts on anything, but we have a lot of expertise because we're making the same mistakes, you know, learning as we go.
Well, and we're all active participants. Yes. So we're not just on the sidelines like, oh, we did it. We've got this down pat.
Yes, it's all figured out. Follow my way and your life will become.
I don't know if this exists, but if pluralism exists, then I'm a pluralist. You know, I kind of think that the ways that we can understand the world, I think of it as like a patchwork quilt, right? So there are parts of the universe that you can understand in a certain way. So physics is good for some stuff, but it's not very good for living things. You know, biochemistry is really useful for living things, but doesn't tell you much about, you know, elements or whatever. Psychology, sociology, economics, whatever you want to take it, but then also, you know, poetry, sculpture, you know, interpretive dance, religion, Zen, whatever, all different ways of understanding and overlapping and intersecting, but none of them having, as it were, a privileged point of view. And I think then the skill becomes, or if you use a religious word, actually, the grace is to be able to sense and feel where and when one way of understanding or knowing is appropriate, and where another one is, and when to move from one to another, and how to hold multiple frames in play. And then we're back to play. You see, hold in play. Yeah. So to hold things in play, there's a present continuous sense to that. We are playing with this. We are holding it in play. More than one thing is in play. So it's not reducing it down to a sort of definitive unitary thing. But we all find that difficult. And I think by the nature of the mind, and I think many of our institutions and organizations, whether they be churches or governments or cultures or companies, they prey upon that weakness and amplify it, actually. Yeah. So, yeah.
We could keep talking all day, I know. And we will, if you would love to have you back.
I'd love to come back.
One of the things that we do at the end of every one of our podcasts is based on what we've been talking about is invite people to try something over that week and to play with that. And I'm curious what both of your ideas would be. What's coming to mind for me is going back to the very beginning of our conversation when we were talking about optimism, pessimism, and then this idea of constructive. And so for some reason that's sparking something for me, which is, and you asked, or you added to that the question, what can I do with this? And so my invitation for people this week would be to just whatever you have going on, to just take a look at it, and whether you're optimistic about it or pessimistic about it, to shift into that gear of being constructive with it. And just ask yourself, what can I do with this? What's here? And what can I do with this? So that's the idea that's coming to mind for me, for people to try. Is there anything else?
Well, I love that idea of construct, because then it means you're actually doing something with all the pieces. And it's not just something that we're just looking at. I think so. What I notice is I'll be looking on the edge instead of jumping in. So we talk about process a lot. So optimistic and pessimistic get us in that thought of like, oh, is it good or is it bad? where constructive is we're actually getting in the nitty-gritty and starting to see what other options might exist within it.
I think that's right. I think optimism and pessimism, they kind of, again, it comes from the drive for certainty. They want to collapse it into some kind of verdict. And there's a guy that we used to have come and, a very eminent economist here, and come and talk to a group about the state of the world and the risks and opportunities that exist. And at the end, people always want to know, well, are you optimistic or pessimistic? And I'm sitting there kind of going, who gives a damn what he thinks? What does it matter? So you're going to go out into the world, and because this eminent economist says he's pessimistic, you're going to do one thing, and because he says he's optimistic, no, you're not going to do that. And so what a kind of pointless question. But people would always want to ask it. I thought it was kind of weird. And so I think, they collapse us into that sort of state where we don't act, as opposed to. So I mean, if I were to amplify or add to what Kirsten said, I think that. I'd just say, allow the thing that you choose to ask yourself, what can I make of this? Mm-hmm. Allow that to be a source of something you would normally regard as something negative. So a source of frustration or difficulty. So just don't kind of go, oh, it's all good. It's a bad thing. I thought it was a bad thing. It's a good thing. No, because it's not about good or bad. So let go of that judgment and just say, right, I don't have enough time to do it in the way I thought. How can I use the fact I don't have enough time? Can I phone a friend? Do I write it in bullet points instead of in prose, or the other way around? Or do I sing it, or do I ask someone else, or what do I do? So find something that's a struggle or that's difficult. We don't have enough money to do what we were going to do. Okay, great. So what could you do for no money, or what could you do for a small amount of money, or why do you need money at all? Or maybe you don't need to do the thing. Maybe you want to use the time, and then the money you do have is a lot of money for that amount of time to do something completely different. Yeah. So start with the thing that is kind of rubbing up against you, if you like, if you feel like it, because it the stuff that's self-evidently kind of a resource and helpful, it's easier to think about what to do with those things. That's quite natural. So try the opposite.
No, awesome. Love it. Well, thank you for joining us.
Right.
We're really grateful. Sweet dreams.
Yeah. Well, I go time to make some food now, I think. But that was thank you to you. That was a fabulous conversation. I really enjoyed it.